March 1st is the feast day most closely associated with Saint David of Wales, also called Dewi Sant. He is remembered as a 6th century Welsh bishop and monastic founder, linked above all to now in Pembrokeshire. Because the surviving evidence is uneven, his story is a mix of early tradition, later medieval biography, and local memory. Even with that caution, the outline of his cult is clear, and it shaped Welsh Christianity for centuries. He lived in a period after Roman rule had faded in Britain, when power was local and the church was organized around monasteries and traveling clergy. The place most closely tied to him is the far western peninsula of Wales, where the city of St. David's stands today. Later generations treated that landscape as a sacred destination, and they built a shrine that drew pilgrims from across Britain and beyond. David's birth is traditionally placed somewhere in the region of Dyfed, often connected with Caerphilly, near modern St. David's. His mother is named as Non, who is honored in local tradition and later hagiography as Saint Non. Some accounts describe his father as a local ruler, sometimes named Sant, and the details vary from text to text. Those variations matter because the main medieval biography was written centuries after David's lifetime. That biography is associated with Rhaigifarch, a cleric at St. David's, who wrote in Latin in the late 11th century. Rhaigifarch presents David as a figure of strict discipline, intense ascetic practice, and wide spiritual authority. He also fills the narrative with miracle stories, which is typical of medieval Celtic saint literature. One early strand of the tradition places David in a network of well-known teachers and monastic schools. In later memory, he is connected with Iltud, a major Welsh teacher, and with other saints who shaped the region's church life. The Catholic encyclopedia tradition also links him with a teacher named Paulinus, whom David is said to have healed from blindness. Whether literal or symbolic, the story frames David as a healer and as a man formed by disciplined training. As the traditions continue, David becomes a missionary abbot who travels, teaches, and establishes religious communities. Some lists give him a remarkable number of foundations, though historians treat the exact count with caution. What matters is the consistent claim that David's influence spread through monastic networks rather than through royal courts. The core of his adult life is associated with a monastery at Minau, later called Menevia in Latin sources. There, David is described as living with monks in an unusually austere routine. The stories emphasize hard physical work, simple food, and a demanding daily discipline. In one famous tradition, David's nickname is linked to water, and the theme of water appears repeatedly in miracle accounts. The hagiography presents water as both practical and symbolic, tied to purity, endurance, and provision. David's relationships in the tradition include other major Welsh saints, especially Teilo and Patron. Those names matter because they show how Welsh Christian memory clustered around circles of disciples and fellow bishops. The most famous public episode attached to David is the Synod of Brefi, convened against Pelagian teaching. In that account, David is reluctant to attend and has to be persuaded to come. On his way, he is said to have raised a widow's son back to life. At the synod, the best-known miracle occurs during preaching. The ground beneath David is said to have risen, forming a hill so the crowd could see and hear him. The story functions like a visual seal on his authority, presenting him as the decisive voice against error. In the same narrative stream, an earlier church leader named Dubricius is said to have resigned, with David appointed in his place. Later tradition calls this an archbishopric centered at Caerleon, though the historical structure is debated. The point of the story is consistent because David is portrayed as the chief bishop of the Britons. Another synod appears soon afterward in the same source tradition, sometimes dated to the year 569. It is called the Synod of Victory, and it is also described as being directed against Pelagian influence. That same account claims its decrees were confirmed by the Pope, showing how later writers wanted Roman approval emphasized. A striking feature of David's legend is the way it links Wales to the wider Christian world. One story describes David traveling to Jerusalem and being consecrated bishop by the patriarch. Modern scholarship often treats this as hagiographic, yet it reveals how strongly medieval Wales wanted apostolic prestige. The same narrative style links David's major decisions to figures like King Arthur, especially in the claim that David moved his see. In that account, he transfers ecclesiastical center from Caerleon to Menevia, closer to his monastery and the western coast. However one judges these details, Menevia becomes the geographic anchor of his cult. That anchor later became St. David's Cathedral, a major pilgrimage focus in medieval Britain. The hagiography also includes internal monastic drama designed to highlight David's virtue. One episode describes servants attempting to distract the monks with obscene behavior. Another episode claims some monks tried to poison David, but he blessed the bread and ate it unharmed. A separate miracle tale brings in a visiting saint from Ireland, said to have crossed the sea in a single night on a sea monster. These details are plainly legendary, yet they illustrate the genre and the moral aims of the text. David is also linked to a wider Celtic Christian sea world connecting Wales, Ireland, Cornwall, and Brittany. In the Roman martyrology, he is remembered as a bishop of Menevia, who governed his monastery in the manner of Eastern Fathers. That line is important because it frames him as monastic and episcopal at the same time. It also claims that from his monastery, many monks went out to evangelize in neighboring lands. This portrays David less as a solitary hermit and more as a leader of a disciplined missionary school. His death is traditionally fixed on March 1st, which is why the feast falls on that date. The exact year is uncertain, and different annals and later sources give different dates around the end of the 6th century. The Dictionary of Welsh Biography notes an annal entry at 601, while also pointing to other chronicle traditions closer to 588 or 589. Raigifosh also records a tradition that David died on a Tuesday, which has been used to argue for specific years. Even with uncertainty, the feast date itself became stable and widely recognized. A famous saying is attached to David's last exhortation, usually translated as a call to do the small things faithfully. The phrase became a cultural motto in Wales, used in schools, churches, and national celebrations. After David's death, devotion to him grew through local pilgrimage and through church dedications in Wales. By the High Middle Ages, St. David's was one of the best-known pilgrimage sites in Britain. A turning point came in the early 12th century, when papal recognition and privileges boosted the shrine's status. St. David's Cathedral records that in 1123, a privilege from Pope Callixtus II declared 2 pilgrimages to St. David's equal to 1 journey to Rome. The same cathedral source states that 3 pilgrimages to St. David's were regarded as equivalent to 1 to Jerusalem. Those claims reveal the shrine's international reputation and the church politics of the time. They also show how pilgrimage functioned as an economy of devotion, travel, and institutional prestige. Wikipedia and other summaries connect this recognition to the efforts of Bernard, Bishop of St. David's, and to Callixtus II's papacy. In medieval practice, saints like David were often recognized through papal confirmation of an existing local cult. That is why you will see different years given for his official recognition, sometimes 1120 and sometimes 1123. What is consistent is that the early 12th century marks the period when Rome publicly elevated St. David's as a major pilgrimage destination. Over time, David became firmly established as the patron saint of Wales. His iconography is also stable, usually showing him as a bishop with a dove and sometimes standing on a small hill. The dove points to holiness and inspiration, while the hill recalls the miracle at Brefi. The geography of his cult is equally vivid because pilgrims approached the peninsula as a sacred edge of the land. The cathedral notes that medieval pilgrims came to pray for help in hardship, for family needs, and for the dead. They also encountered a landscape marked by chapels connected to David, his mother Non, and other local saints. That network of sites turned the region into a mapped spiritual memory. The shrine itself was built in the 12th century and placed near the high altar area, according to the cathedral's description. The same source notes that the Reformation destroyed the shrine and caused a steep decline in the practice. Even after that decline, St. David's remained a recognizable symbol of Welsh Christian history. The deeper reason David remains important is that his cult represents a specifically Welsh Christian identity. Rhagi Farsh wrote his life during a period of Norman pressure and church disputes, when Welsh ecclesiastical independence was contested. In that setting, elevating David served a political purpose as well as a devotional one. It claimed ancient authority, local sanctity, and a direct line of holiness rooted in Welsh soil. It also offered an ideal of leadership based on personal discipline, monastic order, and teaching power. For a March 1st celebration, the core themes are therefore clear and historically grounded. David is remembered at Mainiu, in a coastal landscape that became a national shrine. He is remembered as a bishop shaped by monastic austerity and by a network of Welsh and Celtic saints. He is remembered through a defining public legend at Brefi, where preaching and authority are sealed by a miracle. He is remembered through a feast date tied to his death on March 1st and carried in calendars for centuries. And he is remembered through the medieval pilgrimage privilege granted under Pope Callixtus II, which made St. David's a destination of European scale. Today, when you see the image of a Welsh bishop with a dove, you are seeing the condensed symbol of that whole tradition. When you hear the phrase about doing the little things, you are hearing the cultural afterlife of a saint's farewell sermon. And when you hear that 2 pilgrimages to St. David's were counted as 1 to Rome, you are hearing the medieval voice of an institution defending its place in Christendom. That is why March 1st is not only a liturgical date, but also a window into how Wales built memory, identity, and sacred geography around one name.